Hello, Mr. Cagaptay. Can you hear me okay? It's Kamali here in Istanbul.
Yes, I can. Hi, Kamali. How are you?
I'm very well. On the heels of what President Erdogan said this morning, how do you expect Muslim communities in Paris and across Europe to react to that announcement?
I think the message was very positive because it suggested to the Muslim communities that, of course, they disown ISIS, the so-called Islamic State, and its acts and messages. And the president also advised the Europeans, governments that is, to not blame Islam as a religion for what the so-called Islamic State, ISIS, is doing. So I think the message overall was very positive and on the mark.
And do you think that's something that European leaders can do, try and split between blaming those who carried out these acts, but also looking after the large Muslim communities that are in their countries?
Look, I think so far European countries have, leaders that is, have reacted to this in a mature way. Obviously, they're not blaming their entire Muslim communities or the religion of Islam for what happened in Paris. And even before the attack in Paris, we've seen the example of the German government, which really rose up to the challenge and did something very noble by offering safe haven for the hundreds of thousands of Syrians fleeing that country. So I think the European record on this issue so far is quite positive. The question is the far right in Europe, whether you're going to see a surge in far right votes who will feed on the extremist tendencies in some European countries to blame Islam for what's going on. And unfortunately, that's a rising trend in certain European countries, and we'll have to deal with that. And I think President Erdogan's speech today was also directed at that far-right constituency. But that far-right is not in government in any place in Europe right now. Most European countries have centrist, center-left, or center-right governments.
And in terms of that kind of backlash against Muslim communities, perhaps perpetrated by the far-right, have you, since the attacks on Friday, come across anything anecdotally that has been an example of that kind of backlash against Muslim communities in Europe?
You've seen attacks, of course, on Muslim communities, which are incredibly unfortunate, but these are minor and isolated incidents. And I think, that there are crazy people everywhere, and I just hope that those attacks don't become into mass phenomena. And I think it's really up to European leaders to lead their public opinion, so they will be absolutely leading a direction that they will not be blaming all Muslims. They're actually going after the problematic individuals, whether they are in Europe or in Syria, causing this problem.
How do you see relations between the EU and Turkey currently?
I think this is actually a positive opportunity for Turkish-EU relationship. The talks have been frozen for a while now. The Turkish-EU relationship, which really started on a positive footing when Turkey started the accession talks in 2005, then came to a standstill when the talks were frozen, mostly because of objections by Greek Cypriots and French to the continuation of the talks. So if this was a train, the train came to a full stop. Now, one of the unfortunate but unintended consequences of this unfortunate attack is that the train of Turkey's EU accession will move again, in the sense that Turkey now has a stronger bargaining power vis-à-vis the European Union. Turkey is the only country that can help France and Germany and other EU countries deal with the massive flow of refugees going into Europe. And we can only expect a bigger tide next year. So I think European countries, France and Germany, are getting ready for that, and they want to cooperate with Turkey. So for the first time in over a decade, Turkey is coming to the bargaining table with the EU from a position of strength. And I think that suggests in the short term, Turkey can get some very positive things. For instance, the lifting of visa requirements for Turkish citizens, in return for which, of course, the EU would want Turkey to become a readmission country, so that the refugees who cross into the EU illegally can be sent back to Turkey, because the EU will have deemed Turkey a safe country at that stage. So in the short term, I think the deal will be that Turks will go to Europe and Syrians will stay in Turkey. But the long term is even more positive, because this gives Turkey finally to unfreeze the accession chapters, which were frozen because of French objections. France is now going to be the country that will reach out most to get Turkey's favor, to work with Turkey on the issue of refugees, as well as preventing the return of foreign fighters with the so-called Islamic State into France. So that means Ankara is an incredibly valuable partner for Paris now. So I would expect Paris will lift its objections to Turkey's accession talks, and the Turkish-EU accession train will leave the station and move forward again. It doesn't mean Turkey will get into the EU right away. It just means the process will start again. And I think that's a very positive thing overall, not just because it brings proximity between Turkey and the EU, but also because this being Turkey's EU accession is an anchor of liberal democracy in Turkey.
And just finally then, going back to the attacks, it's been reported that Turkey warned European countries about some of the individuals involved in these attacks, but those warnings weren't heeded. Is that a point of friction and conflict between the EU and Turkey?
I have only seen the news and not the actual reporting, obviously, but I think for a long time, Turkish-EU cooperation on the foreign fighters was less than perfect, and I think until ISIS targeted Turkey, Turkey was in a cold war with ISIS, meaning Turkey did not target ISIS per se because it had bigger fish to fry in Syria, meaning its goal of ousting the Assad regime. And the European Union was basically, I think, blaming Turkey for the flow of foreign fighters in and out of Syria. Now that relationship is changing. Now Turkey is, unfortunately, because of ISIS attacks in Ankara and Suruç, entering a new phase of actual conflict with that group. France is actually entering into a phase of conflict with that group. So Turkish and French positions and Turkish and European positions, that is, are in closer proximity against ISIS than they have been for a very long time. So that means not only the political positions are converging, but also Turkey will get French support, for instance, as it tries to convince the United States to set up a safe haven in northern Syria. France, a key NATO ally, will be with Turkey because France is now as interested as Turkey is in setting up a safe haven in northern Syria to stop the flow of foreign fighters into Turkey and into Europe from there.
Mr. Cagaptay, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for that.